Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first official meeting of the Young Researcher Network within the International Psychogeriatrics Association. Today, as you all know, we'll have an Ask the Editor session with Dr. Dilip Jeste. He is the Editor-in-Chief of International Psychogeriatrics. But first, let me briefly introduce myself and the other three chairs of the Young Researcher Network, and I'll briefly explain something more about the Young Researchers Network as well. My name is Sasha. I am from the Netherlands. I am a PhD candidate at the Living Lab for Aging and Long-Term Care within Maastricht University in the Netherlands, and my background is in psychology. Dr. Thomas Leon, he is an old-age psychiatrist, a master in psychopharmacology, and he is an Atlantic Fellow for Acuity in Brain Health at the Global Health Brain Health Institute. He is based in Chile. And then there's Kelvin Swart. He is also a PhD candidate based in Dublin, Ireland. He is also a Irish Research Council scholar, and he is a part-time lecturer at the School of Social Work and Social Policy at the Trinity College in Dublin. In Ireland. So the three of us are the chairs of the Young Researchers Network, which is only recently established. And the goal of the Young Researchers Network is to connect early career researchers and clinicians with an interest in the field of mental health for older adults or dementia. Our goal is to connect young researchers and young clinicians and to share knowledge and experiences, and also to connect to each other to form a very strong international network of young researchers who, of course, have the future for the IPA. So we are aimed at PhD students or postdoc researchers, but also at early career clinicians with an interest in research and collaboration. And so today we have our first meeting, and at the end of this session we'll talk you through a bit more about the Young Researcher Network and membership. But first, a few housekeeping tips. We'll soon have the presentation by Dr. Dilip Jeste. It's a pre-recorded presentation, but after the session he will be here live with us to answer your questions. So please use the question and answer, the Q&A button, to ask any questions you have during the presentation. All attendees are muted and the chat feature is disabled. And please, if you have any technical difficulties, try to log on and off again. So today's presenter, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dilip Jeste. He is the Editor-in-Chief, as I told you, of International Psychogeriatrics. He is also a Senior Associate Dean for Healthy Aging and Senior Care. He is a Distinguished Professor of Psychiatry, and he is based at the University of California, San Diego. So a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Dilip Jeste. And after his presentation, there will be about 15 minutes for your questions and answers. We'll have a bit of a discussion going on, and then there will be the closing remarks by one of the other chairs. And hopefully all of you will sign up afterwards for joining the Young Researchers Network. So enjoy today's session.
Hello, I'm Dilip Jeste, and I'm delighted to talk to you about publication strategies, the secret of academic success. I want to thank IPA's Young Researchers Network for inviting me to give this talk. There are several steps in publication of a paper in a journal. The first step is, of course, deciding to publish. Next step is drafting a manuscript and revising it multiple times as needed. Then the manuscript is ready for submission. Then you wait for some time to hear from the journal. Finally, you get the journal decision along with the reviews. Then you respond to the reviews and resubmit the paper. And then the paper is accepted and you become famous, right? That's the way we want it to go. So in my talk, I'm going to begin with what are the critical decisions we have to make in deciding about a paper. Next, the different types of articles that we should think about. And within an article, what are the different parts of a manuscript? What is the review process like? And finally, a summary of the tips for success in publication. So let us start with critical decisions. The first decision is to publish something. Why should we care about publishing? Because what is not published does not exist. Publishing papers teaches us how to conduct research and write articles that are approved by peers. We get feedback and input from others on the quality of the paper and also quality of research. Peer-reviewed publications are the only common currency for assessing and comparing scientific excellence across the world, even across disciplines. Because the grants and other things may vary, but publications don't. And finally, publications are essential for academic positions and promotions, obtaining grant support, and reputation in general. The question, though, is when to publish and what to publish. So after we decide that we should publish something, the first question is when, and second is what. And this depends on, are the data new and are they important? If the data have been known for a long time, then it is not worth publishing. Similarly, if they are not important, they are not worth publishing. So we have to say why they are new and important. Next one, of course, there can be multiple publications from a database. For those of you who work with senior mentors with a large lab or a large center, you'll find that a number of research projects are going on, and some very large projects can yield multiple publications. So there, one has to make sure that we publish the papers without overlap among them. There are ethical issues that also have to be tackled. Ethical issues such as plagiarism, including self-plagiarism. You cannot publish your own work in slightly modified fashion in different papers, for example. There have also been instances of fraud in research. So we have to be careful about all of those issues. A very important decision is authorship. It is often the big elephant in the room, and we must talk about it openly. It is important to decide authorship before a paper is written, and sometimes even before the project starts. Every author is responsible for the entire paper. This is worth remembering, that having your name on a paper is a privilege and an honor. It's also a responsibility. There have been instances in which the papers were found to be fraudulent, although only one or two people were responsible for that fraud, and yet every co-author was held responsible. So be careful. The different authorship positions have different roles. Typically, the first author is someone who writes most of the paper, or at least the initial draft of the paper. The second author becomes the second most important person in writing the paper. The last author is usually the senior author. She or he is the director of the lab or director of the center and has the large data set from which the paper emerged. Someone is named corresponding author, and typically the corresponding author is either the first author or the last author. This is the author with whom the journal corresponds. And then this author takes the responsibility for corresponding with various co-authors. Potential conflicts of interest must be disclosed. For example, if you are publishing on a drug trial, every author must disclose if he or she has any relationship with the drug companies that sponsored this project, or even other drug companies that may not have been involved. Another really big question is, how do you choose the journal? I would say at a young stage of career, please ask your mentors and senior colleagues. That's critical, because there are a number of things that make you decide which journal to choose. And that knowledge comes with experience. There needs to be a good match between the topic of your paper and the journal. For example, an article on mental health in children is not appropriate for a geriatric psychiatry journal, right? And there is desired readership. For example, an article on dementia could be appropriate for a geriatric psychiatry journal like International Psychogeriatrics. It could be appropriate for a journal in dementia, like Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and Associated Disorders. It might be appropriate even for a general medical journal or a journal in aging. So how do you choose that? Which readership is most important for you? Impact factor, I'll talk about that in the next slide. Rejection rate. The higher impact journals have a very high rejection rate. Actually, for the International Psychogeriatrics, our rejection rate now exceeds 85%. That means we reject 85% of the submission. Publication delay. Some journals take a very long time to get a decision, and you should clearly avoid those journals. International Psychogeriatrics, our time for decision is very short. Open access journals. There are journals that have open access. That means there is no copyright for the publisher. However, you have to pay for that. And that amount varies anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000. The open access journals have pluses and minuses. And these need to be discussed beforehand. But the important thing is you got to know the journal. So before you submit an article, look at several issues of the journal. Read some of those articles. Find out who is on the editorial board, what kind of papers they publish. That gives you a good idea about which journal to choose. Impact factor. I know every one of you knows about this. It is important. So what is an impact factor? It refers to the number of citations in peer-reviewed journals. You can get an impact factor for a journal, for a specific paper, or for a specific author. The impact factor for a journal is calculated by looking at the total number of citations to the journal in a given year divided by the total number of papers published during 2 preceding years. For example, the International Psychogeriatrics impact factor last year was 3.0, about 3.0. That means it was cited 3 times the number of articles that were published. So on an average, every article was cited 3 times during last year and the year before that. Impact factor is highly valued, and yet it has lots of limitations. It varies considerably for different papers in the same journal. So not all the papers in the International Psychogeriatrics would have been cited 3 times, some more, some less. Impact factor favors review articles and long articles. It also favors journals which publish fewer papers. Self-citation, that is citations to your own work or to the same journal, are excluded in some but not all the metrics. In recent years, there is increasing focus on what is called the ART metric score. This refers to the number of citations, not in peer-reviewed journals, but in social media and general media. So this includes citations on Wikipedia, public policy documents, discussions, research blogs, mainstream media such as New York Times or London Times, as well as social media, Twitter, Facebook, and bookmarks on reference manager like Mendeley. And these are sourced from the web. There are mainly two types of articles, peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed. And so what are included in these two categories? Peer-reviewed articles are, of course, ranked and valued much more highly than non-peer-reviewed papers. Peer-reviewed journal articles include database articles, which are of two types, regular articles and brief reports, and I will talk about each of these in detail in the next few slides. There are review articles, which are not based on new data. Then there are commentaries or viewpoints, which are typically invited. And finally, letters to the editor. So these are the types of articles that one sees in a peer-reviewed journals like International Psychogeriatrics. What about non-peer-reviewed publications? These include book chapters. Typically, these are invited. These also may include online blogs in, for example, Psychology Today. Non-peer-reviewed publications in newsletters. There is IPG bulletin, for example. And finally, articles in lay media, op-ed articles in London Times or some other paper would be in that category. I'm not going to talk about these non-peer-reviewed publications today because I want to focus on what is most important for academic success, which is peer-reviewed publications. And within that, the most important type of journal article is a regular research article. This typically has a word limit of 3,000 to 5,000 words. Varies according to the journal. And before you submit a paper to a journal, find out what their word limit is. The regular research article indicates that the study was a major one, not some small one. Of course, it is more difficult to write. It is less likely to get accepted because there is higher expectation of quality, especially in a higher impact journal. So these are important, but they are harder to write and get accepted. Somewhat easier to write and easier to get accepted are brief reports. They have a strict word limit of say 1,500 words, 10 references, and one table or figure. Again, these details vary according to the journal, and find out what your journal, the journal you are planning to submit to, requires of a brief report. Typically, you write brief reports for small sample size studies or negative study where you didn't find what you sought out to, or replication of published results. The advantage of brief report is there is short turnaround time. Usually they don't need too many reviewers. You get the review back quickly. And they're also more likely to be accepted. On the other hand, they have lower impact factor. So they don't count as much as a regular research article. What about review articles? Actually, review articles are also important depending on the type of review articles. Scholarly reviews need considerable work. They need detailed tables, but these are valued highly. So these include systematic reviews and preferably meta-analysis, if that is possible based on the literature you have. there is something called Prisma flow diagram. You start out by looking at a data set like PubMed or PsycInfo, using certain search term, find out how many articles are there, and then you reduce the number of articles to those that meet your strict criteria for inclusion in your review. A good systematic or meta-analysis type review is critical for starting any major research project. Of course, like any article, it has limitations, and the limitations of reviews come in two ways. One is limitations of the literature review. You often find that the studies may have small sample sizes. They may not have used the best measures, or they are short-term. Also, there are limitations of the review itself. For example, you might have missed some article that should have been included in the review. One important thing to keep in mind is that you should consider the quality of the studies reviewed. There are some scales such as SASQI, Scale for Assessment of Scientific Quality of an Intervention. So use that such a scale and see what score you give to every article included in your review. Sometimes you are more likely your senior colleague or mentor may get invited to write an editorial or a commentary, and the mentor may ask you to be her or his co-author. And definitely you should accept those invitations. Here, you have to comment on a specific paper or papers in the issue of the journal that is being published, or there may be broad viewpoint. Usually, these are brief, about 1,000 to 1,500 words. And your job is to make it interesting to read. Because these are not data-based or systematic reviews. But it's an opportunity for creativity and also for some provocative thinking. There's also avenue for self-promotion. You can cite your own work and you can talk about your own new ideas that may be acceptable. Letter to the editor. These are very brief, about 500 words. Typically, you write a letter as a critique of a published paper in a journal. You read a paper and you find that something was not done properly. You can write a letter about that. Or the letter can be a new study, but small study. Say only 15 cases, which is not worth a brief report. So then you can write a letter. Letters require minimal peer review. So they can be accepted quickly. On the other hand, they're not included in computing impact factor, and they may not count for academic promotion. So what are the parts of any manuscript? There's a title page, and the title page, of course, there's the title, and the title of the article should be descriptive and attention grabbing. It should not be very serious. Of course, it should be accurate, but more interesting. Look at the word counts, and they should be listed there. The total number of words in the text of the paper as well as in the abstract. Some journals require anonymous reviews. So you have to submit your paper in two formats. One is with the authors listed, another is taking the authors' names out. You also submit a cover letter to the editor, and the cover letter should include some reviews that you suggest. But cover letter does not have any value otherwise. The reviewers don't read the cover letter. So don't spend too much time in writing a long and beautiful cover letter because nobody pays attention to that. The only usefulness is suggesting reviewers. Abstract is a very important part of the paper. It's one page, usually 200 to 250 words. But most readers are busy. So they will read abstract and then they will decide whether to read the rest of the paper. Usually the abstracts are structured. There's objectives, methods, results, conclusions. Again, this varies according to the journal. So find out what your journal's requirements are for the abstract. And in the abstract, make the results and conclusions informative and interesting. Write something that will catch readers' attention. So after the title page and the abstract, then is the text of the paper. The text of the paper includes introduction, methods, results, discussion, references, and tables and figures. The goal of the introduction is to say why the paper should be published. In the methods, you write what was done. In the results, you discuss what you found. And in the discussion, you consider what do the results mean and don't mean. And then, of course, there are references and tables and figures. And I will talk about each of these in the next few slides. Introduction. Why should this paper be published? Why should any paper be published? One, because the topic is important, and you have to say why your topic is important. Two, why it is controversial. In the sense, if there is universal agreement about something, it's not worth publishing. For example, to write a paper saying that antipsychotics reduce delusions and hallucinations in schizophrenia is really not controversial. Most of them do that. The introduction should then summarize briefly what you sought to do, what's the purpose of the study, and it must end with hypothesis. The last paragraph in introduction must be hypothesis. Of course, sometimes you can have exploratory analysis, but hypotheses are really important. Then go to the methods. Methods should be detailed. And the goal of the method, it would allow any reader to do another study, to replicate the study exactly as is. One must also mention about IRB approval and informed consent. So IRB is Internal Review Board, Institutional Review Board, or Human Subjects Committee, or the Animal Subjects Committee for Animal Research. Describe the study sample. How many people? Where did they come from? Whom did you include, exclude? Reference all the measures that were used, and statistical analysis section is critical. It should be written preferably by a statistician. Results. So the result, there is text, but there are also tables and figures. The important thing is that the tables and figures should have legends, title, as well as at the bottom. You list all the abbreviations, you mention all the statistics that were done, and these should be self-explanatory. You shouldn't have to go back to reading the text to understand the tables and figures. So each table and each figure must be self-explanatory. Important thing, present negative results also. So, for example, if you have 4 hypotheses and 3 of them were confirmed, 1 was not, you must talk also about the one that was not confirmed. Control for type 1 errors. So if you're looking at 50 different variables and you find that 5 of them are significant, it could happen by chance alone. So there is something called type 1 error, which is controlling for the number of analysis, comparisons, or correlation that you do to change your p-value from 0.05 to anything like 0.005 or even lower than that. Discussion should begin with summary of the results related to hypothesis. I mentioned that the introduction ends with hypothesis. Discussion begins with hypothesis, in the sense, what did you find? Whether your hypotheses were proven or disproven. Next, you justify the methodology that you used. Importantly, compare the results with those in the literature. Cite both the studies that support your work and those that do not. Very important, there must be a paragraph or 2 on limitations of your study. If you don't point out the limitations, the reviewers will. So you are better off pointing them out yourself. And finally, consider the clinical and research implications and suggest types of future research study. Don't ever say more research is needed, because more research is needed in every single thing. talk about what kind of research is needed. Regarding references, cite relevant articles that were recently published in different journals, including the journal to which you are submitting your paper. That's important. Many journals have limits on the number of references, so take a look at that. Most journals encourage tables and figures, but they should not be excessive. Again, there is a limit on the number of tables and figures for many journals. As I mentioned, these should be self-explanatory and avoid redundancy with the text. So if you give some results in the tables and figures, don't repeat that in the text. Then comes the review process. So you submit a paper, and sometimes you may get the response back within 3 days or within a week, and the response essentially is rejection because the editor felt that the article was not worth for the review. That can happen. That does happen frequently, especially with higher impact journals. In the international psychogeriatrics, for example, we reject about 80% of the articles without reviews very quickly. But if the article is considered to be worth reviewing, then the editor will send it to the reviewers, and then you will get reviews back in a month or 2 months, or sometimes longer than that. And typically, decision is not likely to be acceptance as is. That is very rare. Acceptance with minor modifications is quite uncommon. Much more common would be either major modification or rejection. So major modifications means the reviewers have major comments that must be done, must be implemented before they reconsider the paper. And of course, rejection is again common, especially the higher impact journals. So what do you do when you get the reviews back? Of course, if they reject it outright without reviews, there is not much you can do. You submit to another journal. But if it comes back with reviews and the editor wants you to resubmit it with revisions, you have to do everything that the reviewer suggested, if at all possible. And remember that just because you have made the changes and resubmitted the paper doesn't mean it will be accepted. It could well be rejected. Because the reviewers may feel that you didn't respond to their comments satisfactorily. What do you do when a paper is rejected? Submit it to another journal. But if you got the reviews, make changes and then submit it to another journal. Sometimes I get appeal from the author saying that paper was rejected and really should not have been. Usually these kinds of appeals don't work because the editors typically rely on the reviewers. Occasionally they may work, but in the same time, the editor may agree to re-review the paper. The worst thing you can do is paper that has come back with suggestions for revisions and that's rejected. You make no revisions and submit it to another journal. That's a very bad choice. Don't ever do that. If you have some comments, please make those changes and then submit it to another journal. Sometimes it's not worth continuing work on the paper if there are major flaws that you can't correct. I would actually also encourage you all to try to review a paper. At a younger stage, you won't be asked to review, but your mentor frequently will be. And you can tell the mentor to include you in that review process. So you can prepare a review, share it with the mentor, get her or his comments, and improve your review. That's a great way of learning how to write better papers. A good review should include a summary of the study, then talk about the positives and strengths of the study, then list problems one by one by page numbers. Don't be nasty. Be critical but fair and constructive. do unto others what you wish to be done to you. What kind of reviews you like, right? Those which are constructive. And in the review, you should not recommend acceptance or rejection in the comments to the authors, because that's the editor's decision. And finally, you should request the editor to see other reviews of the same paper, because then you can find out what are the things you had missed in your review. And my final section, tips for success. And I know there were several questions I saw from the YRN, which are great questions. The main rookie mistakes done by young researchers in their papers, actually I alluded to several of them. Main difficulties for non-native English speakers. That is definitely an issue for an international journal. Please consult your librarian or somebody else who is very fluent in English. Have them go through the paper and correct the language. Because when you get a paper that has wrong grammar or multiple typos, those papers are not likely to be accepted. So please make sure that the paper is reviewed, your draft is reviewed by somebody who is very fluent in English and makes those changes. That increases your chances of acceptance. How to choose between open access or traditional publication? Open access journals cost money, as I said, anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000. But you can distribute those to everybody. There is no copyright involved. Typically, open access journals have lower impact factor than those without open access. So it's a choice between journals based on finances as well as impact factor. Are critical literature reviews, critical commentaries, theoretical papers welcomed and valued? I would say critical literature reviews, that is systematic reviews or meta-analysis, are highly welcomed and valued, but not commentaries and theoretical papers, not at the early stage of your career. It is important to develop critical thinking skills and arguments within writing of article. Good to have a journal club and discuss different papers, their pluses and minuses. That's a great education in improving your thinking as well as writing skills. Good writing is a must for any journal. It should be jargon-free English. Make it a story. Make it interesting. Again, there are actually books and courses on how to write. And this is not based strictly on your fluency in language. I have seen many people who are, even people who are born in this country, born in the US, who are so articulate and fluent, but they can't write very well. So writing is not merely a function of fluency in language. It's a question of ability to write scientifically. There are books on how to write. Read those books. Read some papers. There are courses also on how to write. Have the paper critiqued by mentors and peers. Multiple drafts are inevitable. It should not be committee's work. Don't have one person write statistics, one person write imaging section, one write clinical section. No, one person ultimately should put it all together. Devote uninterrupted long hours for writing. And finally, practice, practice, practice. The more you write, the better you'll write. Common mistakes: very long, wordy, and unfocused papers. That's the most common mistake I've seen. Using technical jargon or too many abbreviations. As I mentioned, poor English with typos, grammatic errors, not paying attention to the journal's guidelines. If the journal requires 3,000 word article and you are submitting 5,000 word article, that's not going to be even reviewed. Presenting only positive results and discussing only supportive literature. In other words, ignoring findings that don't agree with your study. Not consulting a statistician is a grave mistake. You must consult a statistician, preferably before you start the study, but definitely in the early stages and you're writing a paper. Unjustifiably broad conclusions. And blaming the rejection on somebody that doesn't help. Finally, tips for success. So master the topic area, the area which you're writing on, you should know everything about that area. Secondly, choose the right journal. How do you do that? By talking to your mentors, senior peers, get to know the journal, and keep in mind the readership. Brevity is the soul of scientific writing. Long, wordy won't fly. Brave, something brief, succinct will fly. Justify the methods used, that's important. Statistical input is absolutely critical. And the discussion should be balanced, not overly positive, but also consider the study limitation. So with this, I will stop here and I'll be happy to take any questions. I'm just so delighted that you are interested in these peer-reviewed publications, and I wish you all the success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeste, for that great presentation. I know I learned an awful lot there. And I suppose just to reassure the people that are here today that this will be up online, so people will be able to access it, just with the little technical difficulties in between. But just, I suppose the first question, Dr. Jeste, is from someone that was at the presentation, and they asked, how do you feel personally about publishing redone research or negative results? And do we appreciate these studies enough when assuming good quality?
The negative results actually are important. It's a question of results on what. So let us say something is widely accepted or generally accepted as a fact. To give an example, study that shows, there are a number of studies that show that people with schizophrenia have larger ventricles in the brain on MRI, that they have atrophy. And if you find that actually in your study, with a large number of people with schizophrenia, you found no difference in the ventricular size between schizophrenia and control, that would be worth publishable. However, you develop a new method to look at, say, some kind of intervention, and you find that the intervention was not effective. That may not be publishable because that's not really interesting negative finding. So the negative finding, if it is interesting for the field, it will be publishable.
That's very interesting. Dr. Jeste, there's another question here in relation to, from Victor. He says, is it appropriate to submit to a couple of journals at the same time? You know, in terms of balancing that?
Actually, that's an absolute no. You should never, ever submit an article at the same time to two journals. That's actually, it is unethical and perhaps illegal. So don't ever do that. So when you submit an article to a journal and then you change your mind, you can ask that journal, you can say that you are withdrawing that article. Get your withdrawal confirmed, then you can submit it to another journal. But when you submitted an article, it is being reviewed, you cannot submit to another journal. Because the risk is that you may actually have the same reviewers at both places, and the reviewers will point out that this is the article, and the editor will then get so upset that they will never ever accept your article in future. So it's a very serious mistake to make, is to submit it to two journals at the same time.
And do you think it's, you know, best to speak with your mentor, or, you know, if you're talking about the journals, if about that, or building a strategy?
Absolutely. I think talking with the mentors and senior colleagues is critical, because we all learn in the process. So for example, I remember when I was a young investigator and didn't have too many papers submitted, accepted, I came up with an idea about a paper. I put it together. I thought it was brilliant paper. And if I submit it on my own, it will be rejected in no time, because I really didn't seek input from the senior people who have been there. For example, so I come from India, as you know, so I'm not, English is not my mother tongue. And so I also had to learn English. And So and the place I came from, in India at that time, there was very little research in psychiatry. So I wrote a paper on study of schizophrenia. We had 100 people with schizophrenia and then 100 controls, right? And we found that there were more men in the schizophrenia group. They were younger, they had more severe psychotic symptoms, more severe negative symptoms. So I thought this was a great paper because it was the first paper on schizophrenia in India. I submitted, and it came back in 2 days for rejection because there was no new finding there. It may be new for the city I came from. It may be new even for my country, but there's nothing new in that. Everybody knows that at a younger age, schizophrenia is more common in men. Schizophrenia patients have more positive and negative symptoms. So there's nothing new. So just because it was first paper from my place didn't make it publishable. But that I would have found out if I had talked to my mentor. The mentor would have said, well, there are hundreds of papers published on this topic. So is it important? Is it controversial? And the answer to both of that was no. So that's why it is really the most important thing you can do is to talk to mentors, senior colleagues who have published a bunch of papers. So instead of learning by trial and error, you learn from their mistakes, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Dr. Jeste, there's a really good question here asking about if you want to write a thesis, how can I deal with the introduction and literature review, and what is the main difference between them? It's a big question, I suppose.
So as I mentioned, so literature reviews are publishable if they are systematic or meta-analytic type literature reviews. So, for example, we recently published a paper on meta-analysis of interventions, which are randomized controlled trials to improve components of wisdom like emotional regulation, empathy and compassion, spirituality. And we found 57 studies and so on. If we had just written a review, which included a few articles from here, a few from there, and general commentary, that would not have been publishable in a good journal. So because the literature reviews actually are cited more than database paper often. If it is a systematic literature review, especially a meta-analysis, those are harder to write, but they are worth writing because when they're published, they're cited by many journals. And so on the other hand, sort of just a regular review commentary type, unlikely to be publishable in a good journal.
It's really interesting. And Dr. Jeste, there's another question here asking, how many times should you try to publish in a journal with a high impact factor before you decide to publish in a journal with a less high impact factor?
There is no simple answer to that question. It will vary according to the topic, but it partly depends on the reviews that you get. For example, if I submit an article to, say, New England Journal of Medicine, it comes back in 48 hours, rejection. It is called desk rejection, that the editor rejects it before sending it to the reviewer, right? So if I get these desk rejections from 2 or 3 high impact journals, I should know that that's not really going to fly with higher impact journal. So I need to go to a lower impact journal. The journals do differ. So something that may not be accepted by one high impact journal could be accepted by another. So it is not impossible. However, the chances go down. Again, consult with your mentor. It really is a question of, one mistake I remember I did when I was growing up was I thought something was really important for the field. But because I was interested in that topic. But then I realized that if I was interested in the topic, that doesn't mean that other people are interested in the topic or it is important enough for publication. So, so again, consult with lots of senior people and find out.
Great advice again, Dr. Jeste. There's another question here that asks how to distinguish and avoid predatory journals. The comment here says young researchers are often tempted by them.
What is meant by predatory journals?
I assume maybe ones that aren't actually peer-reviewed journals. You know, the way sometimes online you can be asked to submit to a, yeah.
So that's a really great question, because I know these days we get lots and lots of those invitations. And my response is, if you get this note from a journal saying that we are looking for an article, we have all the articles except one, and that's why we welcome your article, don't ever submit there. Don't ever. Good journals will not write to you to ask for articles. They won't. Because most good journals have too many papers and they reject most of the papers. So when you get an invitation to write, don't write, because those are often the open access journals. What they do is they will look at the article, they may accept, they will likely accept the article, and then they will say you have to pay $2,500. And then nobody else has heard of that journal, so it has zero impact. So good journals will never ask unknown people to submit an article. So that's a rule to keep in. On the other hand, if some senior person asks you, then it's different. But yeah, I mean, it makes you feel very good that somebody's asking me.
We're actually coming just to the end. Yeah. It seems like common sense, Dr. Jeste, but it can happen easily, I suppose, as well. But we're at the end of the questions and answers, and I didn't even get a chance to ask one myself, but maybe I can ask you another time. But thank you so much for taking part in the questions and answers with me. It was really interesting and insightful.
You're welcome. I'm delighted.
So yeah, I'll pass it.
Opportunity and best wishes to everyone.
Thank you so much. I'll pass you over now to Thomas for the end.
Hi. Right. Perfect. Well, just to end the webinar, I want to thank everyone that attend, the presenter, Dr. Jeste especially, but everyone participating in this, and IPA for believing in the opportunity to create a young research network. The full webinar for you will be available on demand, because we record everything. And all the attendees should be look for a post-webinar evaluation. And we appreciate that you send us any feedback that you want. We also send an application form for those of you who are interested in joining the Young Research Network. And I want to emphasize that if you want to participate in the Young Research Network, please send us an email just asking for information, because as Sasha said in the beginning, the Young Research Network is a young part of IPA, and we are looking to work with you and for you in creating opportunities for young researchers. We are looking to create opportunities in the next Congress of IPA, but also in techniques on how to write and connect you people together between Young Research Network, but also with mentors that can help you encourage your career and your research. So you're all invited and very welcome to participate with us. We will have a next series of events that will get to you by email. All of you go to participate and sign by email. And you can also look at the website that is there. And I think that is it. Thank you all you so much for participating in this first event. That is going to be definitely not the last event of the Young Research Network. So I hope, and we hope to see you all there in the next events. Thank you so much.